In the Havza district of Samsun Province, Turkey, two rivers, the Hacı Osman Creek and the Tersakan Creek, overflowed their banks simultaneously on the night of May 12, 2026, and within 10 minutes, according to eyewitness accounts confirmed by Turkish state media, the entire town center was submerged, not gradually, not with warning. 10 minutes. Cumhuriyet Square disappeared beneath fast-moving water, the A and Bahilivler neighborhoods vanished under the current, ground floors of businesses were consumed to the ceiling. Dozens of vehicles were not swept to the side of the road, they were swept away entirely, tumbling through streets that had been dry pavement less than a quarter of an hour before. As of this morning, May 15, 2026, 12 people have been confirmed hospitalized by the state-run Anadolu agency, including one 83-year-old man who remains under medical observation. Samsun Governor Orhan Tavel stood in the flood zone and told reporters, Havza is currently paralyzed. If you rely on this channel for science grounded in verified data and explained with honesty, subscribing ensures that none of this reaches you late. This work depends on the audience that values it. The events in Havza are unfolding as this script goes to record, and the data emerging from the ground is telling a story far larger than a single night of rain. Every figure in this script was drawn from official scientific and governmental sources, the state-run Anadolu Agency, Turkish Disaster Authority, AFAD, peer-reviewed climatological research published in scientific journals, and verified historical records from Floodlist, the European Disaster Coordination Network, but official sources are not infallible, and neither is the human process of reading them before any decision is made, whether personal, professional, or otherwise verify independently through the official channels. The sources are public, the data is available. The responsibility to check belongs to all of us, but that is not even the complete picture. What happened in Havza on the night of May 12th was not an anomaly, it was not an aberration, it was not, as the language of surprise reporting might suggest, something that arrived without precedent. The event in Havza is a data point in a pattern that scientists have been measuring, publishing, and warning about for years, a pattern inscribed in the geology of this coastline, encoded in the behavior of a body of water called the Black Sea, and amplified by a set of atmospheric conditions that the peer-reviewed scientific record now shows are intensifying across every measurable index. The town of Havza did not flood because of bad luck. It flooded because it sits at the convergence point of a system, a mountain wall, a sea, a warming atmosphere, and rivers that have overflowed before and will overflow again. And on the night of May 12th, all of those forces arrived at the same place at the same moment. Understanding why requires going deeper than the waterline. It requires going all the way back to the shape of the land itself and to the physics of what happens when warm moisture meets cold elevation at speed. It requires looking at what happened 5 years ago along this same coastline and at what the instruments are showing right now about where this system is heading. The town of Havza is not the story. The town of Havza is the warning. To understand what struck Havza, you must first understand the Black Sea coast of Turkey not as a coastline but as a trap. The Pontic Mountains, the range that runs parallel to the Black Sea shore across northern Anatolia, rise steeply and immediately from the coast. In some sections, the mountains ascend more than 3,000 meters within a horizontal distance of fewer than 50 kilometers from the sea. The Black Sea surface maintains relatively high moisture content, and when moist air masses move southward off the water and encounter that wall of elevation, they are forced upward rapidly. As they rise, they cool. As they cool, they can no longer hold their moisture. The precipitation falls, concentrated, intense, and sudden, on the narrow coastal strip and in the valleys between ridges. This is what atmospheric scientists call orographic precipitation, and research published in peer-reviewed journals confirms that the Black Sea coastal region of Turkey receives the highest annual precipitation of any region in the country in some eastern stations, exceeding 2,000 millimeters per year. The city of Rize, on the eastern Black Sea coast, regularly records more than 2,200 millimeters annually. The rain does not fall evenly. It falls in events compressed, violent, brief, and when those events coincide with already saturated ground, with river systems already running high, or with narrow valleys that funnel water toward populated centers, the result is precisely what happened in Havza on the night of May 12th, the Hacı Osman Creek and the Tersakan Creek, both of which flow through the center of Havza's urban district, are not large rivers. They are not the Xlarmak, which drains across much of central Anatolia before reaching the Black Sea. They are local watercourses, the kind that on an ordinary evening carry quiet water through the middle of a town of approximately 38,000 people. On an ordinary evening, residents of Havza walk past those creeks on their way to Cumhuriyet Square, past shops whose ground floors sit at pavement level, past the businesses, whose owners have worked the same streets for decades. The town of Havza is known, among other things, for its thermal springs waters that have drawn visitors for 2,000 years, according to historical record, used since antiquity in the treatment of rheumatic conditions and joint disease. It is a town of market traders, small manufacturers, school children who were sent home from those schools on May 13th because the buildings required cleaning and structural assessment after floodwater entered them. It is not a town that most of the world has thought about. But it is a town of 38,000 people who went to sleep on the night of May 12th in a community they understood and woke on May 13th to something unrecognizable. Business owner Bey Ramenses told reporters, "Everything was damaged, the water almost exceeded our height, it swept the vehicles away." Bahadur Kaya, standing In what had been his shop, said, "We have never seen such a thing before. We were caught off guard. We were stranded. The rain suddenly poured down. 10 minutes. That is the number that does not leave the mind once it has been heard, not hours. Not the slow creep of a river in protracted flood. 10 minutes of rain that were sufficient to transform a town center into a fast-moving current capable of carrying automobiles. That number is itself a measurement, and what the official data actually shows is that this kind of speed, this compression of rainfall intensity into intervals so short that warning systems are rendered functionally useless is precisely what the scientific literature identifies as an increasing trend in the Black Sea region of Turkey. Research published in the International Journal of Climatology examining sea surface temperature anomalies in the Black Sea and their relationship to extreme precipitation events in northeastern Turkey found that above normal sea surface temperatures identified in the study as exceeding 27 degrees Celsius, representing positive, anomalies of approximately 2 degrees Celsius create conditions for accelerated low-level moisture convergence. When those moisture-loaded air masses meet the Pontic Mountains, the uplift is rapid, the precipitation event is short, and the intensity is extreme. This is not a hypothesis. This is documented in the peer-reviewed record, research spanning station data from 1927 to 2019 across 21 meteorological stations in the Black Sea region of Turkey, published in climatological journals, found an increasing trend in the total amount of annual rainfall in maximum single-day rainfall amounts, and in the annual sum of daily precipitation exceeding the 95th percentile. The system is not stable, it is accumulating. The question is not whether events like the flooding of Havza on May 12, 2026 will continue. The question is at what interval they will arrive and at what intensity, and here is where this account becomes genuinely significant, because the flooding of Havza is not the first time this province and this coastline have been struck. It is not even close to the worst to understand the true weight of what the data is showing. It is necessary to go back to August 2021 and to a disaster that the Turkish Interior Minister, standing in the ruins of a town called Bozkurt in Kastamonu Province, described as the most severe flood disaster he had ever witnessed. In the early hours of August 11, 2021, heavy rainfall began falling across the Black Sea provinces of Bartın, Kastamonu, and Sinop. Within 24 hours, monitoring stations recorded what can only be described as extraordinary measurements. The town of Ulis in Bartın Province recorded 302 millimeters of rainfall in a single 24-hour period. The town of Bozkurt in Kastamonu Province recorded 292 millimeters in the same window. Ayank Sinop Province recorded 245 millimeters. To contextualize those numbers, London, England receives approximately 600 millimeters of rainfall in an entire year. Bozkurt received nearly half of that in a single day. The rivers that drain through Kastamonu's valleys, already running fast after days of preceding rain, became something other than rivers. They became walls. Water rose in some areas 2 meters 13 feet before subsiding. Apartment buildings in Bozkurt did not flood. They collapsed. A 4-floor residential building was partially destroyed. A second building next to it was completely destroyed. 5 bridges were severed across the affected provinces. 2 more were severely damaged. Hundreds of villages lost electricity. Mobile communications failed across large sections of Kastamonu and Sinop. Patients in the Sinop Ayank State Hospital were evacuated by emergency services while the building was still flooding around them. The final confirmed death toll, reported by a FAD by August 18, 2021, was 77 people. 62 died in Kastamonu Province, 14 in Sinop, 1 in Bartın. And as of the final official count, 34 people were still listed as missing, 26 of them in Bozkurt district alone, in a town that was, in some sections, simply gone. The Turkish Agriculture and Forestry Minister told reporters on the day of the flooding, "This is a disaster we had not seen in 50 or 100 years. He was using that phrase as emphasis. The geological record suggests it was not an exaggeration. That was 2021. That was 4 years ago, and 300 kilometers to the west of Havza along the same Black Sea coast, the same mountain range, the same convergent system of moisture and elevation. The system that killed 77 people in Kastamonu and Sinop in August 2021 and the system that paralyzed Havza on May 12, 2026 are not different systems. They are the same system operating at different intensities, and the verified scientific trend data shows the intensity is moving in one direction. Consider what the residents of Havza face on the morning of May 15, 2026, which is today. The floodwaters have begun to recede, according to official reports from AFAD and the Samsun Metropolitan Municipality, which deployed teams alongside SASC, State Hydraulic Works personnel, and Havza municipality workers throughout the night and into the following days. Backhoes and municipal machinery moved through streets still, coated in mud and debris. Business owners began cleanup operations while damage assessment teams worked alongside them. Schools in Havza remained closed on May 13th for physical restoration. The damage to vehicles, dozens of cars swept through the district center by the current, represents months or years of savings for the tradespeople who lost them. One citizen, Bahadur Kaya, described being stranded inside his shop as the water rose. Backhoes had to physically come to rescue him, not emergency boats. Backhoes, because the water was not navigable, it was structural. It was a moving wall of current carrying debris, mud, and the inventory of every ground floor business on the street. Samsun Governor Orhan Havel, surveying the zone on May 13th, told reporters there was serious damage to workplaces and that no fatalities had been reported in this event. That is a small mercy. In Kastamonu in 2021, there was no such mercy. The province of Samsun holds a population of approximately 1.38 million people according to Turkish Statistical Institute data from 2022. The city of Samsun itself, the provincial capital on the Black Sea coast, carries a population of nearly 740,000. These are not remote settlements. Samsun is a major Black Sea port. It is the city where Mustafa Kemal began the Turkish War of Independence in 1919, a fact that has made it historically significant to the Republic of Turkey in ways that go beyond geography. It is a city with universities, hospitals, an opera house, manufacturing districts, and 35 kilometers of coastline. It sits within a province that drains multiple river systems, including the Xlarmak and the Yilirmak, two of the major river arteries of northern Anatolia. When the Black Sea rainfall system intensifies, when a night of 10-minute cloudburst rainfall overwhelms two small creeks in a district town of 38,000, the question that residents of the broader Samsun metropolitan area must ask themselves is what happens when the next event is larger, faster, or better positioned over a river system with more volume than the Hacı Osman and Tersakan Creeks? The data does not offer comfort on this question. The residents of Havza's Cumhuriyet Square and its surrounding neighborhoods are not statistical abstractions. They are people who know the creeks by name. They are the shop owners of A and Bahilivler neighborhoods who opened their businesses on the morning of May 12th without any indication that by nightfall their ground floors would be submerged. They are the teachers whose schools were closed not because of a holiday, but because the buildings needed to be cleaned of the mud that the water brought with it. They are the 83-year-old man whose name has not been released and who, as of today, remains under medical observation in Havza State Hospital, a man who has presumably lived through decades of rain in this town and who on the night of May 12th experienced something he, like his neighbors, said he had never seen before. What? Would those people want to know if they had access to the data? They would want to know why this happened with so little warning. They would want to know whether the creeks will do this again. They would want to know whether the infrastructure that failed, whether the drainage systems, the channel capacity of those two watercourses, the emergency notification system is being addressed in a way that acknowledges not just what happened on May 12th, but what the trend data says is coming after it. The connectivity of this system extends beyond the Black Sea coast. Two global patterns are relevant here, and the verified scientific literature addresses both. The first is the relationship between Black Sea surface temperature anomalies and extreme precipitation events along the Turkish coast. Research published in peer-reviewed climatological journals has established that positive sea surface temperature anomalies in the Black Sea, the warming of the sea's surface above its historical average, directly increase the moisture content of air masses moving off the water toward the Pontic coast. The Black Sea is a closed or semi-enclosed body of water, which means it warms more responsively than open ocean systems when atmospheric temperatures rise. As global average temperatures increase, the Turkish National Climate Change Action Plan projects temperature increases of between 2.5 and 5 degrees Celsius across. Under future climate scenarios, the Black Sea surface temperature rises with them. Higher surface temperature means more evaporation. More evaporation means more moisture in the air masses that the orographic system then forces upward against the Pontic Mountains. More moisture forced upward rapidly means more intense precipitation. Events. The chain is direct, physically established, and already measurable in the station data going back to 1927. This is not a projection. The trend is already in the record. The second connected system involves soil saturation and urban drainage infrastructure. What the flooding of Havza illustrates and what the flooding of Bozkurt in 2021 illustrated at catastrophic scale is that the landscape's ability to absorb or root extreme rainfall is finite. When that capacity is exceeded, the excess does not wait. It moves. In the case of Havza on May 12th, it moved through Cumhuriyet Square. In the case of Bozkurt in 2021, it moved through apartment buildings. The drainage infrastructure of small district towns along the Black Sea coast of Turkey was not designed for the precipitation intensities that the scientific record now shows are occurring with increasing frequency. The channel capacity of the Hacı Osman and Tersakan Creeks, which were adequate to carry the rainfall of May 12th on any other ordinary evening, was exceeded within minutes. What exceeds the channel capacity goes over the channel, and what goes over the channel in a town center goes through the town center. This is not complex hydrology. It is the basic physics of volume and space, and the only variable that changes its outcome is whether the channel capacity has been expanded ahead of the event or whether the population has been warned ahead of the event. On the night of May 12th in Havza, neither of those conditions was met. Scientists choose their language carefully here, and that careful language is itself the warning. The peer-reviewed literature does not say that every Black Sea town will flood catastrophically. It says that extreme precipitation frequency is increasing. It says that single-day rainfall maximums are showing upward trends across the region. It says that the precipitation events exceeding the 95th percentile, which is to say, the worst rainfall events in the measured historical record, are occurring more often. What the scientific language is describing, in the careful vocabulary of measured evidence, is a coastline that is becoming less predictable and more dangerous. It is saying that the interval between events like Bozkurt in 2021 and Havza in 2026 is shortening. It is saying that the next event may not arrive for years after the last one. The monitoring is in place. AFAD, Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Authority, has response teams positioned across the Black Sea provinces. The Samsun Metropolitan Municipality has infrastructure teams that were deployed in Havza within hours. Of the flooding on May 12th, Sask water utility personnel, state hydraulic works crews, firefighters, and police all arrived before dawn. The response, by all available accounts, was coordinated and rapid, and yet 12 people were hospitalized. And yet an 83-year-old man remains under observation, and yet dozens of vehicles were swept from the streets, and yet every ground floor business in sections of the neighborhood was filled with mud. Rapid response is not the same as prevention, and prevention in the context of an intensifying atmospheric system operating on a coastline with steep terrain and fast-rising rivers requires infrastructure that has been built to a standard the data now demands not the standard it was adequate for 20 years ago. In 2021, in the aftermath of the Kastamonu disaster, then Agriculture and Forestry Minister Bekirpak Demirli stood in the ruins of Bozkurt and said his country was facing a disaster it had not seen in 50 or 100 years. 4 years later, on May 12, 2026, residents of Havza in the same Samsun Province of the same Black Sea coastline said they had never seen anything like what arrived in 10 minutes of rain. The language is identical, the meaning is the same, and the distance between these events in time, in geography, in magnitude is shrinking. The geological record holds a longer story still. The Black Sea itself is not a static system. It is a body of water with a complex paleoclimatic history. Its shores have been reshaped by sea level changes, by the retreat and advance of glaciers, by tectonic processes that have pushed the Pontic Mountains higher over millions of years and thereby steepened the orographic gradient that drives coastal precipitation. The flooding of Havza is an event measured in hours. The system producing it has been operating for millions of years. What has changed is not the physics of the system. What has changed is the temperature of the water it begins with, the concentration of moisture in the air masses it generates, and the human population now living in the narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea. That population has been there for millennia. The town of Havza has known human settlement for centuries. Its thermal springs visited since antiquity. But in the 21st century, the intensity of the system those populations live beneath is being augmented by something new, a warming atmosphere that is, with each measured year, adding incrementally more energy to the moisture cycle that drives Black Sea coastal storms. Minutes are not hours, and in this context, that difference is everything. The difference between 10 minutes of warning and no warning is the difference between a family getting to an upper floor and a family standing in a ground floor room as the water enters at ceiling height. The difference between a creek within its banks and a creek over its banks is measured not in hours of rainfall but in the peak intensity of a 20-minute window. The difference between a disaster that produces 12 hospitalized residents and a disaster that produces 77 dead is not always the size of the storm. Sometimes it is the height of the building. Sometimes it is the direction of the drainage channel. Sometimes it is whether a single road out of a valley has had its bridge maintained. In Bozkurt in 2021, 5 bridges were severed. The military had to send ships. They had to deploy temporary bridge vehicles to reach towns that had been cut off not by distance but by the destruction of their connections. An 80-year-old woman went missing in Barton Province and was never found. Her name was not released in the reports this correspondent reviewed, but she was there. She was a person who had lived through many decades of rain on that coast, and she was gone. What the data from May 12, 2026 in Havza shows, and what the data from August 2021 in Kastamonu and Sinop confirmed before it, is that this coastline is operating in an accelerating mode. The precipitation extremes that the scientific literature identifies as showing increasing trends are not future projections being modeled by a computer. They are measurements from stations that have been recording rainfall since 1927. They are events that have already happened, already been recorded, already been entered into the scientific record as data points in a trend. The system is not approaching a dangerous phase, it is already in one. And the events of May 12, 2026, in Havza where 2 creeks overflowed in 10 minutes and paralyzed a town of 38,000 people are a data point within that phase. The flooding also struck neighboring provinces on the same system. In Kastamonu's Tosya district, rural roads in Gavrechik village were inundated by the same pattern of torrential rain and hailstorm that hit Samsun Province. In Anchor, drainage systems were overwhelmed by sudden downpours and streets flooded. In Bolu, hail and heavy rain converted underpasses along a major highway into pools, stopping traffic. A single atmospheric event moving across a wide arc of northern Turkey simultaneously exceeded the infrastructure capacity of multiple urban and rural systems in multiple provinces within hours. This is what a regional atmospheric event looks like in a warming climate, not a single localized disaster, but a simultaneous stress test of infrastructure across a connected geography. The question that the data places before us as of May 15, 2026 is not whether Havza will be repaired. It will be. The machinery is already moving through the streets. The mud is being cleared. The schools will reopen, the business owners will return to their shops and begin the long inventory of what was lost and what remains. The question that the data places before us is whether what happened in 10 minutes on the night of May 12th in a town of 38,000 people on the Black Sea coast of Turkey will be understood. Not as an isolated event requiring local repair, but as a measurement data point in a documented, peer-reviewed, instrumentally confirmed trend that requires a different scale of response. The question is not whether the Hacı Osman and Tersakan Creeks will overflow again. Given what the scientific record shows about Black Sea precipitation extremes, the question is only when and at what magnitude, and whether the people living in Cumhuriyet Square will have more than 10 minutes to reach the upper floors. The 83-year-old man in Havza State Hospital said nothing that has been reported. He was simply, they're still under medical observation this morning, according to Anadolu Agency, because his age made the stress of the event something that his body required time to recover from. He has lived through more rain on that coast than any of us reading these data reports. He did not expect the night of May 12th. He has not said so publicly, but the fact that he is still being monitored, still requiring the attention of a medical team days after the water receded, is itself a kind of measurement. It is the human measurement of a system that science is documenting in millimeters of rainfall and percentile exceedances and sea surface temperature anomalies and orographic uplift rates. The instruments measure what they can. The 83-year-old man in the hospital measures what they cannot. The Black Sea has been here for millions of years. The Pontic Mountains have been rising for longer than that. The moisture cycle that converts the surface of a semi-enclosed sea into extreme precipitation on a narrow coastal strip is as old as the mountains themselves. What arrived in 10 minutes in Havza on the night of May 12, 2026 was not new, it was ancient. It was the land doing exactly what the land has always done, except that the land is now doing it with more energy than at any point in the recorded instrumental history of this coastline, and the energy is still increasing, and the interval between events is still shortening, and the 83-year-old man in Havza State Hospital had never seen anything like it in his entire life.